There's a certain hush that lingers in the corners of the world's forgotten libraries. The kind of silence that doesn't just fall, it drifts. You don't stumble into these places. You're drawn, almost magnetically, by the whisper of stories that no longer exist anywhere else. They're tucked away, sometimes beneath cities, sometimes on remote hillsides where the sun only brushes the rooftops at an angle. Libraries that seem older than memory itself. I remember the first time I stepped into one like this. The door was unassuming, a simple oak frame, the brass handle worn smooth from decades of fingers brushing it. Hesitant, reverent. Behind it lay a darkness that smelled of dust, oil, and time itself. And when I crossed the threshold, it was as if centuries exhaled in unison. The air was thick, not oppressive, but carrying a weight. Every inhalation seemed to draw in whispers of the past. Shelves rose like cathedral walls, stacked to impossible heights with volumes bound in leather, parchment, and sometimes cloth so fragile you could almost see the weave of history in the fibers. Some books bore no title at all, only strange symbols embossed in gold that glimmered under the soft glow of lanterns swinging gently above. Their spines curved under the weight of secrets, and the faint creak of a wooden floor under my boots was the only sound punctuating the stillness. It wasn't just a library, it was a labyrinth. Narrow aisles wound between towering shelves, twisting back on themselves, creating alcoves that felt like private worlds. In one corner, I found a table littered with scrolls so brittle I could barely touch them, each one inscribed in a hand older than the ink seemed to allow. In another, a ladder leaned against a shelf reaching toward a ceiling lost in shadow, suggesting books no human had seen in generations. The knowledge in this place was chaotic. Sprawling anything that had ever been forgotten, avoided, or erased somehow had found a home here. It was a record of human curiosity and folly, stitched together with the faint pulse of obsession. And that's when I realized the library didn't just store books, it stored questions. Questions humanity had asked and then tried to forget, experiments that failed in silence, discoveries that were lost to fire, flood, or political decree. One shelf held alchemical diagrams whose meaning had slipped through centuries like sand through fingers. Another contained maps of continents that never existed or maybe had existed and vanished. A faded journal described an expedition across a desert no one alive had ever seen. Its sketches of strange architecture as precise as they were impossible. Every artifact seemed to say, "This once mattered, and yet you've never known it." I wandered, unable to resist, running my fingers along bindings as if I could absorb their knowledge by touch. I imagined the hands that had written these pages, the minds that had pondered what seemed unthinkable. How many nights had someone sat by candlelight, feverishly recording their observations of stars, plants, or human behavior, knowing that this knowledge might die with them? How many ideas, revolutionary or trivial, had been suppressed by fear, or lost in wars, or discarded for being too dangerous or too ridiculous? Here, they persisted, patiently waiting for someone curious enough or reckless enough to notice. There were shelves labeled in languages I didn't know. Some books opened only with a peculiar touch, releasing the faint scent of incense or a chemical tang, like the text itself had been preserved in an arcane ritual. I found manuscripts that contained entire philosophies, as though civilizations that never intersected had all left traces here, and the library had patiently curated them, a mosaic of human thought. The longer I stayed, the more I understood that no other library in the world could rival this one. It wasn't just about preservation, it was about continuity. Knowledge that had been intentionally destroyed elsewhere found refuge here, and I began to see the library not as a place, but as a living memory. The light shifted as the day passed, or maybe it didn't, and I simply lost track of time. Dust motes floated in the beams like stars caught in a net, and shadows moved in ways that seemed almost deliberate, as if the library itself guided my attention to certain volumes. I discovered a locked cabinet, its key nowhere in sight, containing books so small and densely written that they seemed to compress years of study into pages no larger than a hand. Nearby, a globe marked with places that no longer existed stared at me like a sentinel, daring me to ask questions I wasn't sure I was ready to answer. Human curiosity, I realized, was what this place thrived on. Every visitor it ever had or ever would have added a layer to its atmosphere, a residue of awe, frustration, obsession. Some came seeking power, some answers, some simply a thrill, and the library accepted all. Its corridors absorbed these intentions, keeping a record not of words, but of minds reaching toward the impossible. I felt it pressing against me, urging me to think, to wonder, to imagine, to question the very nature of what I considered lost. The strangest part was that I wasn't alone. Or maybe I was. Sometimes I thought I saw a shadow out of the corner of my eye, a figure slipping between shelves, too tall to climb, moving with a silence that felt almost human, but not quite. I told myself it was my imagination, but deep down, I wondered if the library had its own guardians, or perhaps it was a consciousness formed entirely of the questions humanity had abandoned, now thriving in these endless rows of books. It wasn't threatening, exactly, more like curious, patient, waiting for someone willing to take the risk of discovery seriously. By the time I finally left, the sun had dipped low, casting long beams across the oak floor. I walked out into the world changed. I had glimpsed knowledge that might have altered history, secrets that could have rewritten science, art, or politics, but the library had allowed me only a taste. It had reminded me that the pursuit of knowledge is more important than its possession, that curiosity, even unfulfilled, is a kind of treasure, and that some secrets are not lost forever, they are merely waiting, like seeds buried in soil, for someone brave enough to nurture them. Walking away, I realized that this library was more than a building filled with books. It was a testament to human resilience, to the refusal to let history completely vanish. It was proof that even when everything else is forgotten, the desire to know, to understand, persists. And if I ever return, and I know I will step through that unassuming door and let the quiet, the dust, and the endless shelves guide me once again into the heart of forgotten worlds. Because some doors are only meant to be opened by curiosity, and some libraries exist solely to answer questions we haven't yet learned how to ask.